No. There we are. And a lot of people came on first. There was a lot of noise, so I've stopped the recording. So we'll leave it at that. But now that you're here, I think it's good to record. All right, we got some more people coming in. Michael G.
On. No, I'm gonna.
There we are. I unmuted everybody, so if you want to say hello to somebody, go ahead.
Well, hello, everybody who's here so far. Good to see people. Shana Tova.
Yep. And there are people coming in, so I'll just let them in.
Great. Yeah, we're still early.
Yep.
I do have to say, what a spectacular service this morning. I didn't see yesterday, but this morning was amazing.
Yeah, so was the family service this morning. It was
Very
David.
good.
It was very good. I'll start exactly at 1:30.
Okay, great. Because you can still let people in.
Of course. But they're going to miss this introduction to you.
Hi. How are you? I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. I'm just considering, do you know a woman named Cynthia Good? Hi, she's listening to me talk.
I am.
It's part of Holy Blossom, and it's about books, and I'm interested. But I'm going to mute myself for a minute, Cynthia.
Good.
No, I jumped.
Shana Tova.
Again, we'll be starting in about 5 minutes.
Cynthia. Hi, Cynthia.
Hello, 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 hello.
That looks like Dennis. Hello, Dennis.
Hello,
Dennis.
Oh, make a participant, don't want a name.
Judy.
Well, it won't let me do it for some reason.
If for some reason I'm hearing an echo when I talk, so I'm going to put myself on mute.
And we'll be starting in about 2 minutes.
Cynthia,
Yeah,
hi, Shana Tova. Do you want us muted or not?
muted for now, and then we will be very happy to hear you later. I just had to get Dan set up so he could watch it. Good to see your face, Barbara. Oh, and another Barbara.
Yep. I've got to let people in.
Yes, that other Cynthia is actually Dan.
That's what I thought. Okay, well, I think it's 1:30 and it's time to start our study session. My name is Dennis Helfman. I'm the father of Rabbi Helfman, and I've been asked to facilitate this study session with Cynthia Good. Now, as you all know, Cynthia is a member of the congregation and runs a book discussion through the temple. The next one is September 29, if you're interested in participating. And you can get the link, through the Life at HBT newsletter that comes out. Cynthia is the former president and publisher of Penguin Books in Canada. She's also a professor emerita of Hamburg College. She currently consults in writing and publishing and facilitates a number of book clubs. So you're all in for a real treat. I'm going to mute everybody at this stage and just let you all know that at the end of the session, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll take them on as we finish. And Cynthia has agreed to answer any questions or provide any additional information that you desire. Plus, all the titles that she'll be discussing, I will post on the screen as we get in the question and answer session. So if you want to copy down those titles and the authors, I find the easiest way is to take a screenshot with your camera. Then you always have it. Otherwise, you have a lot of writing to do. In any event, thank you all for coming, and I'll turn it over to Cynthia. Uh-oh, you're not,
There we go. I think I'm all right now. Can you hear me?
yes, you're all set.
Okay, good. So sorry about that. And hello, everyone. So good to see so many familiar faces. And thank you, Dennis. Welcome, everyone. Shana Tova. Thank you for joining us. Okay. In my mind's eye, I can see it. There it is, the Boys and Girls House on St. George Street in Toronto. I don't know how many of you remember that place. Built in 1922, it was the very first children's library in the whole British Empire. But I'm talking about the 50s, and I'm holding my mother's hand as we enter the familiar and beloved stone arches that take me into the world I love, the world of books. And there they are, all my favorites. Ping the duck on the Yangtze-Kiang River, Angus, the little Scotty dog and the ducks, Ferdinand the bull and his flowers. My mother encouraged my passion for reading. When I was older than my Ping years and ill in bed with German measles, she brought the library to me every day, delighting me with more books, introducing me to Arthur Ransom and his Swallows and Amazons, and E. Nesbit's Treasure Seekers. As time went on, I greedily consumed everything available for preteens. Cherry Ames, the nurse, Trixie Belden, and of course, all of Nancy Drew's mysteries, Enid Blyton's famous 5, the Fantasies of George McDonald. My tastes ran to mystery, adventure, and gentle fantasy. And it was that love of the ethereal fantasy type that brought me to a pivotal moment in my life as a young reader. It would be no surprise to learn that I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe with hunger and with delight. But something remarkable happened as I read that book. Although I was very young, I found something familiar in the story of Aslan, the lion ruler sacrificed and reborn. As a Jewish child, I had been fascinated by the Jesus story. And reading C.S. Lewis, I came to a profound realization. Aslan was Jesus. This would have been extraordinary enough to comprehend at my age, but I went further in my thinking. Aslan was Jesus, and he was still Aslan. Literature could do this, allow for the symbolic significance without sacrificing a beloved original. It was at that moment with that book that I knew I wanted nothing more than to spend my life reading. And how fortunate I have been in that I have done just that. Today, I plan to talk about the books that have sustained me, certainly during this pandemic, but also at other crucial moments when I dearly needed a biblio friend. And I'll share with you some of the research and theories about reading from my friend who is a psychologist specializing in the reading of fiction. And perhaps at the end, along with questions, you might want to add some of the titles, some of the books that have meant a great deal to you at any point in your life, whether you were young or now during these challenging times. My next literary epiphany came as I read Wuthering Heights. I had already read it on my mother's recommendation when I was in high school. She had a very old edition of the book, which I treasure to this day. As most young women do, I felt drawn to the love story, longing to meet my own Heathcliff, contemplating the discussion about heaven in the book, and swept away by the atmosphere of the moors, all that preternatural passion. But years later, in my university class, I read it as if for the first time. And I discovered that there was a frame around the narrative. Yes, the story was important, indeed elemental, but the way the story was told was equally important. Lockwood suddenly emerged as a character, as our guide with his own prejudices. And Nellie, what an extraordinary moment it was when I realized that she was not necessarily telling Lockwood or us, the readers, the truth, but that she was manipulating the telling. I was overwhelmed by the concept of the unreliable or naive or vindictive narrator, and found and loved other examples in the modern novel that I read in those university years. Elizabeth Bowen's Death of the Heart, Ishiguro's Remains of the Day, Ford's The Good Soldier, The Great Gatsby, Heart of Darkness, even Agatha Christie's classic, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. It's still one of my favorite literary devices and has of course become even more popular with books like Gone Girl. As many of you know, I had 20 remarkable years at Penguin Books. One of the first novels that I edited there was Timothy Finley's Not Wanted on the Voyage. When the manuscript landed on my desk, I experienced the full onslaught of imposter's syndrome. How could I, with so little experience as an editor, expect to be able to help one of Canada's then greatest novelists? I began to read the pages, and slowly the panic diminished. I felt much as I had in university, facing an exam question. At first I would think, I can't possibly answer this. I know nothing about this subject. But then a window would open, and I would realize that I actually knew a great deal about the subject. And so it happened with Not Wanted on the Voyage. I began to intuit how I could help, what might needed to be done. And that slow seeping recognition, that intuitive something characterized my years as an editor. Not that I feel editorial skills can't be taught, they can be, but there is some creative instinct that is a gift, just as writing is. A gift I will always be grateful for having and for having been given the opportunity to use it. And what a fascinating challenge it was for someone who had been interested in depicting consciousness. My thesis topic was about the presentation of consciousness in the female protagonists of the Victorian novels. And now I was grappling with depicting the consciousness of animals. Tiff and I discussed this over many late nights at Stone Orchard, and I watched in admiration as he pulled it off. Timothy Finley and I remained friends until his death. There were other books I edited or published at Penguin, both fiction and nonfiction, that affected me and made me proud. And maybe I'll tell you about them some other time. But now I'd like to turn to those books that I've read for pure pleasure and that have delighted me or helped me through tough times in my life. I have found solace and inspiration in the works of Annie Dillard, Anne Lamott, Kathleen Norris, Amos Oz, and others. But it is the particular book at a telling moment that has been most important to me. When my mother was dying and in palliative care at Grace Hospital, someone there asked me if I had read Can't Wait to Get to Heaven by Fanny Flagg, the author of Fried Green Tomatoes. Isn't that a bit frivolous? I asked. No, she replied, it's what you need. I happened to mention the conversation to my friend Pat Capone, and Pat appeared at the hospital with the book just an hour later. I opened it and read the inspiring epigraph. One is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. As I read Can't Wait to Get to Heaven, I was being wonderfully, simultaneously distracted and supported through those last days of my mother's life. It is the story of Eleanor Shimthistle, who at 90 decides to climb her ladder to pick figs from her tree so she can make jam. She's attacked by wasps, falls from the ladder, and is declared dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. She proceeds to heaven, where she meets a dear old friend who serves her her favorite caramel cake. And she has a conversation with her hero, Thomas Alva Edison. But due to a glitch, heaven doesn't keep Eleanor, and she's sent back, much to the confusion of the hospital and the delight of her friends and family. Sure, it's hokey and sentimental and also very, very funny. But don't I love to think of my mom in heaven? She'd be eating the toasted danishes she adored when I was a child, chatting about books with Arthur Ransom and singing a duet with Frank Sinatra. Sometimes amazing coincidences happen in reading. I was reading a George Eliot novel, that's no surprise to many of you, while I was holidaying on the Isles of Scilly. I learned that George Eliot and her partner holidayed there in 1857. And the same thing happened when I was reading Paul Bowles's Sheltering Sky. I was in Kenya on the island of Lamu, very exotic place to be. I couldn't believe the coincidence when I was told that Paul Bowles himself had once stayed there in the very same hotel. Another thing I remember about Lamu, I was there by myself with a dozen books as my companions. As I finished reading Sheltering Sky and closed the book, I thought, the king is dead. And as I immediately lifted my next title, I thought, long live the king. Sometimes I don't want to start a new book. The previous one is too precious to me. I'm still encased in its world. But then I begin and jump in, like leaping into a cold lake for a swim. The first moment is alienating and chilly, but then I'm in my element, moving easily and gratefully in the refreshing, nourishing atmosphere of the words and the characters. But most of the time, I have to begin a new book immediately. There is no interregnum for me. As I said earlier, books have been faithful companions in times of personal hardship. While recovering from illness, I was asked to be on the Trillium Book Award jury. That Ontario award is given to the best book of any genre. So instead of my usual fare of just fiction, I read poetry, nonfiction, memoir, and plays, a really good experience. One book stands out, Birds, Art, Life. Written by Kyle McClear at a challenging year in her life, it is about a year of bird watching and nature walking. My feelings for this book, which won the award, are best expressed by novelist Barbara Gowdy, who said, quote, every now and then you read a book that changes the way you see the world. I know I will return to it again and again for inspiration and solace, end quote. Birds, Art, Life is a gorgeous book filled with generosity and light. It helped me through a rough time. Anne Cleeve's the brilliant creator of the Shetland and Vera mystery series, said in an interview in The Guardian, quote, "Stories have always been healing. Reading about people who have been through experiences like ours and have come through the other end gives us hope. If we're drowning in our chaotic thoughts, stepping inside someone else's head just for a while can offer a kind of freedom." And another rough time, more recently. After my father and my dear friend Pat died early in the pandemic, I found it hard to grieve. Without our blessed Jewish rituals around mourning, and without the support of family, friends, and congregation, I was at a loss. Times being what they were, I had lots of time to read. Those of you who have been joining me on Zoom for good books know all about my reading. Some has been funny and touching, like The Grammarians by Catherine Shine. Others gloriously and gorgeously written, like Hamnet and Judith by Maggie O'Farrell. And others challenging and intriguing, like The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. The novels I read were not chosen to support or reflect my grief, almost the opposite. But sometimes the books touched on mortality, grief, and loss. It helped. One of the best of those was Afterlife by Julia Alvarez, about a woman's life after her husband dies. She muses on her loss. Quote, "She has continued to think a lot about the afterlife, especially in the absence of any sign from Sam. What, if anything, does it mean, an afterlife? All she has come up with is that the only way not to let the people she loves die forever is to embody what she loved about them. Otherwise, the world is indeed depleted." End quotes. And you might find that there is a wonderful meditation on this in our prayer book saying exactly the same thing. And unexpectedly, I found two insightful comments on grief and dying from Donna Leone, the mystery writer set in Venice. The first is beautiful and hopeful. It's from Trace Elements. The main character, Detective Brunetti, is at the side of a dying woman. Quoting from the book, "Time held its breath. Far off, what appeared to be the upper part of the mast of a sailboat disappeared, swallowed by the sea, as the boat sank beyond the horizon. He looked back at the dying woman and felt a chill at the thought she was making the same passage. He hoped there was someone on the opposite shore who would see the top of the mast slowly growing taller as the boat grew closer." And this is from Leon's Earthly Remains. "Grief lies inside us like a landmine. Heavy footsteps will pass by it safely, while others, even those as light as air, will cause it to explode." Which reminds me of what Rabbi Goodman said to me in my mourning: grief is patient. I have spoken of how the act of reading sustained me during times of grief. Not just those specific themes as above, but the very act of reading seemed to give me comfort and sustain me. Studies have proven it to be so. This is from an article written by my friend Keith Oatley, world-renowned specialist in the area of the psychology of fiction. He quotes from several studies on this. Quoting from his article now. "Distraction fulfills an important function during grief. It satisfies a need to escape from the stress and pain that loss causes. Perhaps the cognitive effort required for reading facilitates this function. The words on paper only come to life with an effortful shift in attention from the loss experience to the narrative world. Both music and reading also support recognition. Among readers, recognition was among the most highly ranked coping functions. These results suggest a coping process that alternates between recognition and distraction, perhaps seeking both confrontation with and relief from thoughts of the loss, end quote. But reading fiction is not just there for us in times of grief. It helps us understand ourselves and others. Recently, Barbara, a friend of mine, was reading D.H. Lawrence's The Rainbow for the first time. She reminded me that in the chapter titled The Man's World, there is the description of Ursula's becoming a teacher. She started out wanting her students to love her, and then she had to learn to become a professional who is part of the system. This just blew me away, said my friend, as it so reflected her own experience as a young teacher. She asked if there is a literary term for this, for, as she put it, for a time when a reader comes upon something that so describes her own experience that your breath is knocked out. This recognition or resonance is a big part of why we love to read. I love reading Anne Tyler anytime. I've read all of her 23 novels, and each one makes me smile or laugh out loud. I find great satisfaction in the quirky yet recognizable problems of her characters, followed by the quiet delight of their triumphs and resolutions. In her people, I always see aspects of myself and of my friends and family. I especially enjoyed the recent one called Redhead by the Side of the Road. And the corresponding experience is to read about lives so unlike our own that we would never meet or know these people and their lives without their books. Such was my experience with the book, This Mournable Body by Zimbabwean writer Tsitsi Dangarembga, which I read while I was in Zimbabwe. And you might be hearing about Tsitsi recently. She's been under arrest for her activities, her protest activities in Zimbabwe. And that book has also been nominated for the Booker Prize, shortlisted. Right now, I'm reading another book that takes me to an entirely different place and to an entirely different way of thinking and feeling. It's Leanne Beresamosake Simpson's stunning novel, Nupaming. In this brilliant and experimental fiction, we gain insights about Indigenous people, their experiences, their thoughts. But Simpson also successfully explores how trees and ducks and caribou think. Ian McEwan said in a Guardian essay, imagining what it is like to be someone other than yourself is at the core of our humanity. It is the essence of compassion, and it is the beginning of morality. These twin experiences of recognition of oneself and widening your circle of humanity are sometimes referred to as mirrors and windows, especially in contemporary children's literature. A mirror is a story that reflects your own culture and helps you build your identity. A window is a resource that offers you a view into someone else's experience. Or another way to look at it is described in M.H. Abrams' brilliant book about the writers of the Romantic period, The Mirror and the Lamp. Abrams explains that in earlier periods, literature was typically understood as a mirror reflecting the real world in some kind of mimesis. Whereas for the Romantics, writing was more like a lamp, the light of the writer's inner soul spilled out to illuminate the world. As I said earlier, books can make us feel better, no matter our mood or situation. But, and this may be a revelation, they can actually make us be better people. That quote from McEwen implies that we are better people because we read, and indeed, that is true. Not that those who don't read can't be better people, but I have the research to share with you, the actual proof that reading makes us better. I'm relying on the research of my friend Keith Oatley and his associates. I will now quote extensively from his article in Scientific American Mind magazine. Quoting now. Psychologists once scoffed at fiction as a way of understanding people because, well, it's made up. But in the past 25 years, cognitive psychologists have developed a new appreciation for the significance of stories. Recent research shows that far from being a means to escape the social world, reading stories can actually improve your social skills by helping you better understand other human beings. Also, a 2009 study found that those who read predominantly fiction are less socially isolated and had more social support than people who were largely nonfiction readers. The process of entering imagined worlds of fiction builds empathy and improves your ability to take another person's point of view. It can even change your personality. The seemingly solitary act of holding up with a book then is actually an exercise in human interaction. It can hone your social brain so that when you put your book down, you may be better prepared for camaraderie, collaboration, and even love. In another study, they found that the more fiction people read, the better they are at perceiving emotion in the eyes and correctly interpreting social cues. Again, quoting from the article, the defining characteristic of fiction is not that it is made up, but that it is about human beings and their intentions and interactions. Reading fiction trains people in this domain, that is, of people and their intentions and interactions, just as reading nonfiction books about, say, genetics or history builds expertise in those subject areas. Isn't that great? And more fascinating stuff. This is about how the brain responds when you're reading fiction. Quoting again, scientists correlated passages displayed in a functional MRI scanner with brain activity. The prefrontal cortex, an area behind the forehead concerned with goal setting, reacted when a character initiated a new goal. The temporal cortex at the brain's side responded to character switches and goal-directed actions. Other parts reacted to allusions to time or to changes in a character's spatial location or dealing with objects in keeping with their regular roles. End of quote. In other words, quoting again, the brain responds to fiction as if a reader were feeling or acting just as the character in the story. You can see how this promotes empathy. And in case you're still not sold on the benefits of reading fiction, know this, and here I'm quoting from another study. After adjusting for factors that included age, sex, and education, they found that as compared with those who did not read or read only newspapers and magazines, those who read books lived an average of 23 months longer. Okay, that's great. Reading books actually helps you live longer, but there's more. In a follow-up study, They found that by far the largest effect of reading on verbal skills came from reading fiction. It is likely also that it was the reading of books and fiction that had the largest effect on longevity. Good for us. But if you are with us today, it is most likely you already knew or intuited the benefits of reading fiction. I come back again to depending on fiction for solace. There was a time a long time ago when I was deeply depressed. I kept thinking of Middlemarch by George Eliot. I vaguely remembered a passage that I felt could help me through the dark time, a time when I only wanted to retreat from the world. I found the passage, and I found it again for this talk. It's not earth-shattering, it's not long, and for many readers, it may not have even been memorable. But I cannot tell you how much George Eliot's words, filtered through Dorothea's consciousness, helped me rejoin the stream of life. Here they are. I always get a little bit emotional when I read this, so excuse me. On the road, there was a man with a bundle on his back and a woman carrying her baby. In the field, she could see figures moving, perhaps the shepherd with his dog. Far off in the bending sky was the pearly light, and she felt the largeness of the world and the manifold wakings of men to labor and endurance. She was a part of that involuntary, palpitating life and could neither look out on it from her luxurious shelter as a mere spectator, nor hide her eyes in selfish complaining. I'll end this part of our session, and with thanks again to Keith Oatley for sending me this from Proust's essay on reading. In reading, friendship is restored immediately to its original purity. With books, there is no forced sociability. If we pass the evening with those friends, books, it's because we really want to. When we leave them, we do so with regret. And when we have left them, there are none of those thoughts that spoil friendship. What did they think of us? Did we make a mistake and say something tactless? Did they like us? Nor is there the anxiety of being forgotten because of displacement by someone else. All such agitating thoughts expire as we enter the pure and calm friendship of reading. End of quote. Oh, sorry, no, it goes on. So reading is a special kind of engagement, a gift in which, as with a friend who is close, we can take part of them in so that they become part of ourself. Not just reciprocity, mutuality. And with reading, what one takes in is a piece of another's consciousness, which we wouldn't otherwise have had for ourselves, with its possibility of transforming and developing our own mind. Thank you, Proust. So, the best writing helps us recognize ourselves, urges us to be our best selves, helps us to understand others, and books are steady companions, offer solace, humor, beauty, enlightenment, and like a good friend, our books are always there for us. So, thank you. That is the end of my prepared prepared words, and now I turn it over to all of you. And Dennis.
There's nothing in the chat.
Okay.
Let me unmute everybody. And if anybody has a question, a comment, or wants to talk about the best books they've recently read, I think we'd all enjoy hearing about it.
Yes.
And while we're doing that, I'm going to put on a list of the books that basically Cynthia has talked about. So anybody have any thoughts?
And
What are the books that most have moved you?
Jerry?
Oh, could I start? Or Jerry, are you?
Jerry.
Cynthia, thank you. That was really enlightening. And I'm going to add some of these books to my reading list. I just wanted to share a book that I recently finished. It's called The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. Maybe some of you have read it or know about it. I love this book. I thought it was a book all about loss of parents, loss of home, but the ending made me just breathe a sigh of relief, as if it were a homecoming, like coming around full circle. So I highly recommend it. And of course, her writing is beautiful. So that's Anne Patchett, The Dutch House.
Thank you, Anne. It is a gorgeous book.
Can everybody see the list of books?
Repeat that title again.
What was the one you wanted to?
The book that Anne mentioned is The Dutch House by
Oh,
Anne
yes.
Patchett.
Okay. Thank you.
Excuse me,
Hi, Barbara.
Barbara Ho.
is the quote, the Proust quote, which is very wonderful, but is the book on there? Is it on the reading list?
It is not. And I just, you know what, it's interesting you say that, because at the end I thought I should look up and find out where this is from, because Keith sent it to me. But I think, you know, we can do that. We can find it.
Okay, thank you. All right.
The essay is called On Reading, so I think it's just an essay that might be included in a book of essays.
Okay.
If we're looking for books that have really moved us, I have one that I read a few years ago that I have recommended so many times to people. I must have read 500 books since then, but it stayed with me, and it's Medicine Walk by Richard Wagames. And I then decided I wanted to read everything that this person wrote, and I wanted to find out about his life. And I did, and it was very, very touching, beautifully written, very affecting.
Thank you.
I just finished reading The American Marriage.
Who's that by?
Gary Jones.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mary Jones?
No.
Jones. First name is Terry. Terry.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. So it's about a marriage. It's a Black couple, and he's wrongly incarcerated. And so it's very timely of what's going on in the States, and about relationships. It was very worthwhile reading.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody remember any books that they read when they were really young, when they were children, that had a big effect on them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's hear some of them. That'd be fun.
I loved Thomas Hardy's books. Canterbury, Mayor of Casterbridge. I loved his books.
Yeah. Tess of the D'Urberville was.
Yes.
Yeah.
And fate played such a part in it.
That's right. Yeah.
And coincidence.
Yeah, a pretty grim view of things, but beautifully written, and an interesting reflection of life at that time for many regular people.
Uh-huh. And I love Dickens too.
Oh.
I love Dickens too. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Mimi Hollenberg. The book that I read when I was in grade 7 that made me think was Alan Payton's Cry the Beloved Country.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And when I came home and I told my father about it, he sat down and talked to me about South Africa and about apartheid. But the book that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention is a book by Angelika Schrobsdorf, Schrobsdorf, and it is called You Are Not Like Other Mothers. It was published in 2012. It's a memoir, and her third husband, was Claudio Lanzmann, who did Shoah.
Oh.
The book is a history of Germany from before World War I and of a family. The book, it's about 700-800 pages. It's on order it's back ordered at Amazon, and Indigo has it. The public library also has a couple of copies. It's phenomenal.
Thank you for that suggestion.
Beg your pardon?
Thank you for the suggestion, Mimi. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jerry. Jerry, are you muted? You're muted. Whoever it says Jerry Friedman here, you're muted, so you need to unmute yourself. We still can't hear you. You are muted. I see your hand up, but you're muted. Oh, Dennis, can you unmute Jerry? Is that possible?
I think it is. I just got to get rid of the screen share. And let me get rid of screen.
You can do it by just by clicking on the participants list.
I know.
Since you're the host.
I've got to get rid of the screen share first because I can't get the list.
Okay.
So let me do that first. And then I'll undo stop share. And then we'll go to Jerry. Unmute him. There we are. All right, Jerry should be unmuted.
Okay.
Well, I hope this is worth all that waiting for. I'm Donna Friedman, Jerry's wife, as a matter of fact, but I wanted to do a shout out for imaginative nonfiction. I know there are a lot of avid fiction readers here. And the book I propose is by James Atlas. He's a biographer. His book is called The Shadow in the Garden. And he writes about his experiences being a biographer and getting into the lives of his subjects, who in his case were poet Delmore Schwartz and novelist Saul Bellow. He was their biographers. And it was a book I just didn't want it to end. And I think that imaginative nonfiction can take us on the same kind of journey that you referenced in some of the best fiction as well. Would you agree with that?
You know, it's a very interesting, I'm sure it can. I'm sure it can. What happens with me is that during my later years at Penguin, I was actually editing mostly nonfiction. And I loved it. It was some of it was narrative nonfiction, history, a lot of politics, a lot of social issues. I loved what I was doing, and I was learning and learning and learning. But it was like once I left that job, it was like a little click in me. And I just said, I just want to read fiction now. And somehow that's just what's happened. But it is in no way that I feel that nonfiction is
I'm watching
not
it,
going to give you the same
yesterday's
read
ball
satisfaction.
was not as good as today's. Today's ball was marvelous.
Judy, do I see your hand there?
You're muted.
Oh,
No, mine wasn't, maybe it was. I didn't notice. but
Judy,
That was yesterday.
Judy,
but
we're
today-
gonna unmute you. Dennis, do you need to
And-
unmute her?
Yeah, okay, thanks.
There we go.
So, yeah, so
Yeah,
I could,
no,
I
no,
put
I mean,
myself on mute, but I couldn't take it off. I was introduced to
Well, I think it's
Robert J.
wonderful.
Sawyer a long time ago. And the
delicious,
first
and
books
I
that I
tried this.
read
mean,
were
once
the
you put the
Farseer series,
horseradish on it,
but
it's fabulous.
he's talking in the background. But the ones
Oh,
that
you
I
like that? I'll get
really,
it for you
really
this
like
week.
are his hominid series, his about the Neanderthals and humans. So I think the
Well, you know
three
what,
books are
Lois?
called Humans,
I'll just
Hominids, and Hybrids.
We've got 3
I
more
can't
balls
recall.
left.
But
I'll
to
take, and I'll
me,
take a vote. Oh, that'll be fabulous, but as I say, I was gonna go
Sorry,
to Northampton.
somebody needs to mute themselves because we're hearing a conversation in the background.
It's Nissenboim.
okay, well, that's off. Okay, so
Okay.
the three books by Sawyer are, I think the titles are Humans, Hominids, and Hybrids. And they talk about the real life center in Sudbury, underneath the surface in Sudbury, Ontario, where a lot of scientific research is going on. But then it springs into obviously speculative fiction, where somebody passes through the portal and gets to the same geographic place, but the people there are Neanderthals, and the fiction is that they did not die out. And reading them and thinking about them made me think about how we all have a tendency to other people, and how foolish that is. And they just had a very, very good effect on me, I think, and they're really fascinating. But I like most of what he writes. A lot of his speculative fiction does get into the realm actually of spirituality. So I would highly recommend his stuff. It's Robert J. Sawyer.
Robert would argue that
Yes.
speculative fiction and science fiction is the genre that is the most often ethical, and searching through the most important moral questions.
Absolutely.
When Rob was just starting out writing, and science fiction, as it was then called, was still kind of looked upon, there were the big names, but here in Canada, there was very little being published, and he actually couldn't get a Canadian publisher. And part of what Rob had to do was, in this country, convince publishers and readers the tremendous value. And now he's a world-renowned, best-selling, many award-winning writer. He's also a really terrific guy.
Yeah, I've just started reading his new book on Oppenheimer, set around the time of the Manhattan Project and the bomb that was used in Japan in 1945. So you want to talk about moral and ethical issues, that whole story is full of them.
Thank you. Thanks, Judy. Okay, who else has a book to talk about, or a book that had an influence on them, that comforted them, or something from their youth? Anyone else?
Yeah, hello?
I see Barbara. Barbara, go ahead.
Okay, well, I always at this time of year try to read something about Israel or Judaism. And right now I'm reading game theory and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I find it really helpful because it's written obviously in a different way. The author takes game theory and explains it and then uses it to show what the result might be in the case of different, one state, two state, etc., agreements that people might someday come to. And it helps me to understand. It's full of Jewish history. It's full of the history of Palestine from the time that the first Jews went there in the, not at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, but it tells it in a different way. And I find it very helpful because otherwise you could be reading the same thing over and over again.
Oh, fascinating, using game theory.
Yes.
Anyone else? There, Merle. You're muted. Can you unmute yourself? Dennis, oh, there you go.
Okay, there. Okay, one book that falls into none of those categories. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that really I found fascinating was called Blitzed. It's a different story about the Second World War, particularly drugs in the German army and the German military. I had no idea how blitzed these soldiers were, and it explained a lot to me. And it was just a fascinating look at something that it just came out of nowhere. Someone recommended it to me, and I've recommended it several times. And another one by Daniel Mendelsohn, whose work I like very much, called An Odyssey, about a professor who teaches Greek, and his father decides to come and attend his classes, and they have had a somewhat troubled relationship, and it's very interesting to see how it resolves.
Thank you. Thank you for both of those suggestions. Okay, anybody else? Bonnie, hello, Bonnie. Okay, we have the same unmuting thing here. There we go, Bonnie.
So what struck me when you were talking, I mean, I've been trying to keep up with your suggestions, trying to do other things and reading and reading and reading. I just finished Hamlet and Judith, which I loved. And starting the other one that we just talked about, when her husband died.
Afterlife.
Afterlife. So that's what I just started. But what struck me was how your mother brought you books. And it just made something fall into place for me. My parents had walls and walls of books, and they read all the time. And I was a very heavy reader, but I read their books. Nobody ever brought me a book that was age appropriate. Somehow I read Nancy Drew, all that, and I loved those. But other than that, I would read their books, and I was struggling often to understand because they were too old for me. But they loved books. I remember a lot of books on presidents' wives and presidents. And it just made me think that's probably why I have such an interest in politics today. Because I read so much about, I can't remember the author's name, who used to write about all the presidents' wives. He had a book on every president's wife, in a novel form. So it's a lesson to me that if you have a reader, you should probably be bringing them age-appropriate books.
It didn't hurt you develop your reading mind, though, Bonnie.
No, it didn't.
No.
But there were some times, which I can only talk about privately, where I asked my parents what a certain word meant, and they couldn't. I was out in public, and I embarrassed them a few times.
It's good for me to remember my mother. This is this week is her yahrzeit. So she was a fantastic reader herself. She was never finished high school, but her love of reading just went kind of beyond that. It didn't matter. Her love of reading was just amazing. And one of the genres that I didn't mention that she loved to read was historical fiction. And the thing about reading historical fiction, and there were many, from Mary Renault, and I can't even remember all of the names. My sister she has a better memory than me, she would remember. Nora Lofts, that was another one. But the thing about reading historical fiction, of course, was that that was part of the way that I learned my history. And I think most of them were pretty accurate. It was a great way. It was a really great way to learn history. But yes,
I have to thank my parents
really guide us.
I have to thank my parents for giving me a love of reading, but it never occurred to me that they didn't exactly guide me. I just took the books off their shelves. And one of the books was called Divorce Won't Help.
Oh. Well, I did not need any further comments.
Anyway, thank you. Delightful as usual, Cynthia.
Thank you, Bonnie. Good to see you. Okay, who else? Jack.
Hi, Shanatala, everybody. I just finished a terrific book by Ken Dryden called Scotty, a coach like no other. Those of you who may like sports, Ken Dryden was the goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens. He was the goaltender in the famous Russia-Canada series in 1972. I think most of you are too young to remember that. But and Scotty Bowman is the coach, a famous coach, probably the winningest coach in hockey. It's a terrific read. What makes it so interesting is that they once asked Ken Dryden, who, as you know, was not only a hockey player, he ended up he was a lawyer, a member of parliament, and has other posts, including with the Ontario government. He was once asked, what's more difficult, being a goaltender in the National Hockey League or writing a book? Because his first book was called The Game. He said, without question, writing a book is far more difficult than playing professional hockey. So I just wanted to say that if anyone is interested in, or you know someone interested in hockey, he goes beyond just the standard, telling old hockey stories. He's a terrific writer, and I enjoyed the book very much.
Jack, thank you. And thank you for an interesting memory I have. So Ken Dryden's first book was called The Game. Right. I published and edited his second book, which no one will remember. It's called One Life, but no one would recall that book. Actually, it was an interesting experiment, which Jack, I will tell you about at some point. But Ken Dryden's a very, very, insightful and intelligent man who, for The Game was an enormous bestseller in this country and was kind of looked at as the first time that anybody looked at hockey as more than just the pastime. It was the pastime for Canadians, but also he looked at what it meant, how it worked, partly the business of it. It introduced what is the most successful ongoing genre of book publishing in this country, and that is hockey publishing. There is no publisher who doesn't publish a hockey book in the holiday season because they know it's going to have success. Okay, who else thank you, Jack. Okay, I can't see your name. Oh, there. Oh, it's Jerry Friedman's wife. Sorry, I forgot your name.
Donnie. So just 2 words by the great novelist and critic E.M. Forster. And it was the insight of one of his characters. I can't remember if it was Howard's End or Passage to India. And the 2 words are only connect.
Yes.
Howard's End.
Only connect, which is what great literature does. And I find myself just throwing it around, those 2 words, all the time now. I pick up the newspaper or watch the news and see the devastation in the world. And the disconnect. Yeah, thank you, Jerry. And I just think of Forster's 2 words, only connect.
Thank you. Going back to writers like Forster, the early 20th century writers, D.H. Lawrence, it gives us a lot. Forster was an extraordinary writer, but I have to tell you another story since I'm talking about my mom a bit. I also adopted only connect as a kind of motto, and I was always saying it. And so my mother did it for me in needlepoint, and so that I could put it up on my wall in needlepoint. Isn't that lovely?
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else with a contribution of a book? I love hearing your books and your stories, everybody.
Go ahead. Here's one here.
Hi, I'm Helen Brodziak. I'm Jack's wife.
Hiya.
I just wanted to mention for children, maybe middle grade books. When I was a kid, I was an avid reader. And the book that I read 10 times and couldn't put down was Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. And I think it's, you know, a book that begins children, not begins, but enhances their ability to have empathy, would be to read this wonderful story about what a horse went through. And for me, as a child of survivors, I think it was just a little bit easier to read than real stories about the Holocaust, for example. And it stayed with me. And over the years, I've had lots of books that have stayed with me like that, but that one sort of stands out as the beginning. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I haven't thought about that book for a while, but I remember also loving it when I was young. Did they make it into a film? Can't remember.
I believe so.
Yeah. I think so.
Elizabeth
Okay,
Taylor, I think.
Pardon, Barbara?
I think Elizabeth Taylor was in that one, but I'm not sure.
Wasn't she?
That was Blue Velvet.
One of those horsey books.
Sorry, my mistake.
Yeah, I think you're right. Anne Dublin.
So Cynthia, thanks for reminding me about the Boys and Girls House, because that library was the very first place that I went to where I discovered books, because we didn't have books at home. We were very, very poor, and we just didn't have books except for a sitter or a machzer or the Yiddish newspaper, you know. So that was wonderful. We would go there and we would watch their puppet plays also. I don't know if you remember them. But yeah, but talking about children's books, I remember reading all the Anne books by Ellen Montgomery. Anne of Green Gables, Anne of the Island, Kilmeny of the Orchard, you name it, and I loved them because of the writing now would seem kind of old-fashioned, but I really identified with the character, not just because we're both named Anne, but because she was spunky and creative and wanted to learn, and so many reasons. So I can't let that go without talking about my favorite childhood books.
Oh, thank you. I don't know how many of you are watching the TV show, had watched. I just started watching it now. Anne with an E?
Yes.
Very good. Janice, was it you who suggested I watch it? I don't even know. It might have been.
I
Anyway,
love that.
loving it. Anne with an E.
Yeah.
Cynthia, can I mention another book?
Of course. Jack.
Okay. I'm reading a book by, Holy Blossom has a number of authors, including Anne Dublin, by the way, who's written a bunch of books. This book is by Julie Schwartz, who's a member of our congregation, and it's called About Joel. I'm sorry, Since Joel. Since Joel. It's a loving but tragic memoir of her son Joel, who died quite young as a result of a medication error of some kind. Joel was on, described in the book as someone who was kind of on the spectrum, someone who had those kinds of needs. And it's a wonderful, honest, empathic story about her son's accomplishments, how cruel some people can be, including people who live around where we live. It's really a wonderful book. And I'm almost finished it, and I thought to myself, this should be mandatory reading for every social worker in their first year of graduate school. Should read this book because she's very honest, and including her feelings about what it's like to have a child with such needs. He was a terrific kid, by the way, and very intelligent, bright, and involved in our synagogue. So it's Since Joel by Julie Schwartz.
Thank you, Jack. That's great. Okay. Anyone else before we say goodbye? I'm just going to go through everybody one more time. I don't see any hands, so if anybody wants to shout out, and if not, I'll turn.
I want to say one thing, Cynthia.
Dennis, lovely to see you.
I loved your description of reading, because I, like you, have been reading and since I was a little girl. It was introduced to me by my mother, Little Women, which I still have the same books I read, and Anne of Green Gables and Nancy Drew. And the way you describe sitting in the book and feeling in this totally other world is certainly how I feel. And I'm always sad to put a book down, because then what? Why can't I keep reading about these characters? Why are they not part of my life anymore? So I was just fascinated by your descriptions, and also what you were telling us about how it involves our mind and empathy with other human beings. And so I really thank you for that. We're friends, but we've somehow never touched on all of this. And it really, you've described something very real for me. So I thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Yes. Books mean so much to so many of us and do so much for us. That thing that you just mentioned, Janice, about being sorry to leave the characters, I have to say that sometimes I don't leave them. This is one of my strange characteristics. I will go to sleep at night, and I will actually make up more about what. So, you know, if you're lonely for that person, you don't have to be. You can keep them going in your own story.
That's a great idea.
Okay, Dennis, I think that's all.
Well, if that's the case, I want to thank everybody for participating. If anybody wants to see that list of books again, please.
I do, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, let me screen share those books again. And otherwise, I thank everybody for showing and participating.
Okay,
and
can you just go really slowly over the list and start at the top?
Let me go at the top. And again, if you have an ability to take pictures.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing, but I'm not sure that I got them all.
All right, let's try it again. I'm trying to. Not going up, is it?
Whoop.
Ooh.
No.
So for those of you who haven't been able to get this, oh, here we go. Here we go.
There we go.
All right, page.
So if you can't take a picture of this and you're having trouble getting it, you can email me and I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Or I'll find a way to get it maybe to Debbie at Holy Blossom, and you can access it from Debbie. That's what I'll do. No, that's what I'll do. I'll send this list of books to Debbie Spiegel, and in the education department, and you can get it from Debbie. That's probably the best thing to do.
Yep, probably. Thank you.
Do
Thank
that.
you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And an easy fast when that comes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.